You are listening to episode number 111 of Wife Teacher Mommy, the podcast. What to know about trauma with Lindsay Poelman. If you work with or interact with humans, you worked with and interact with trauma. There's no avoiding it, as most of us have experienced some kind of trauma in our lives. So today I'm talking with trauma-informed life coach Lindsay Poelman about what all of us should know about trauma, our own personal healing, and how it can impact us as educators to be informed on trauma. So let's dive in. Welcome to Wife Teacher Mommy, the podcast. I'm Kelsey Sorensen, a former elementary teacher and current homeschool mom. And even though I've been a resource creator since 2014, I've realized that printables alone aren't all you need in order to thrive as a teacher or homeschool parent. That's why I also created this show and got certified as a life coach to help you finally kick burnout to the curb and feel confident with whatever challenges come your way. With the right mindset strategies and new teaching inspiration, you're going to be well on your way to your best teacher life. Now let's go. I am so excited to have another incredible interview on the podcast this week. I'm recording this fresh off of getting off the call with Lindsay. We had such an amazing time chatting, and it's been really fun and a change of pace to be doing some more interviews on the podcast lately. I was doing mostly solo episodes for a while, partially just because of the whole arranging with interviews with the solo episodes and being able to just I'm going to just record a few episodes and plan the content whenever it's convenient for me. But it's been really fun to do these interviews, especially because I have been using so much creative energy lately to work on my book, which I'm really excited about. And I'll continue to share updates about the book along the way. I got my first submission submitted and I just got my editor feedback on Friday. Super helpful. And I'm diving in. I'm writing more for all of you. I cannot wait for this book to come out in 2024. We don't have a title yet. I will keep you posted when we do, but just really excited to be working on this, to be able to support you, not just with this podcast and with Wife Teacher Mommy Club and all the other things we do, like our planners, but also a book that really will condense all this information. I honestly feel like I'm just researching and learning so much more, even just writing the book. So it's been an incredible experience, but I'm also getting a bit ahead on the podcast so I can, focus even more on the book. And we're going to be preparing for our winter Educate and Rejuvenate event. That's right. You may not know that we do a winter one too. We do the big event over the summer where, we have 2 full days, tons of speakers, like the teacher track, the parent track. It's a big ordeal that we promote for months. It's huge. But our winter Educate and Rejuvenate is a little different. It's more intimate. It's smaller. It's one day. We're all together. There's nothing pre-recorded. It's all live together in the span of I think it's 9 to 3 is where it takes place with a lunch break in there. And everybody's all together. And the focus of that event, Educate and Rejuvenate, the big one, is where we have speakers on all kinds of subjects. Basically anything you could want to learn is happening at the big main summer Educate and Rejuvenate event. But the winter event is all about resetting. It's kind of like during winter break, you're not I want to learn about all the things. You're on a break, right? So it's all about, resetting, self-care, taking care of yourself, having some comedy to laugh. We're doing a yoga meditation with Lizzie Langston. I'm going to share even more about this when we announce the speaker lineup on our episode next week. which is going to be a lot of fun. So hear more about it then, but really excited that that's coming up. We're going to be all together, and it's only for our club members, but we have an exclusive offer for you to join us in the club to be able to participate in the event. And another super exciting idea I just had that I'm really excited we're going to be doing the first time at this winter Educate and Rejuvenate event. We are going to be doing an award ceremony. I'm really excited for this because I feel like, nobody ever gives anybody an award for taking care of themselves. But I was like, why not? Why should you not get an award for investing in and taking care of yourself? I believe you should. So if you are a member of the club and you've been in, I'm trying to remember the amount of time we decided, it's either 6 months or a year. If you've been in, or it might have been if you've been in since Educate and Rejuvenate summer. Anyways, you might get an email if you've been in the club long enough to apply for this award ceremony where we get to celebrate you. And I told my husband about it, and I was so bummed actually because I couldn't find it. I went around the house to look for it for a second. He mocked up this actual wooden award we are going to send out to those who apply for this award. And we're going to send it to you. We're going to celebrate everybody who applies. We're going to just celebrate their transformation that they've seen through coaching. And they're going to get an award for putting that work into themselves, because we want to reward you for doing that because nobody else does. So we're like, why not? We can do it. We can do it for you. So really excited about that. Just kind of doing some new, fun, and exciting things inside the club. If you're a member, be sure to watch your emails. I don't know if you might know, you are most likely listening to this podcast right now, but we are actually starting to put the episodes on YouTube. So you can watch if you want. You'll be able to see me and Lindsay's facial expressions, or, whoever's on the podcast that day. And from time to time, I might, again, this is a podcast, so normally it's going to work fine audio. If you only want to do audio, that's totally fine. It's still going to be on Apple, Spotify, everywhere. But we are going to start embedding the YouTube video in the show notes. If you would like to watch the podcast, that is now going to just be another option for you if you would like. So super fun. And I'm really excited as I'm recording this one right now. I'm figuring out my lighting. Right now I look a little washed out, but it's definitely better than it was before being super dark. So figuring it out a little bit over time. So okay, let's get into today's interview. Last week, we talked all about the nervous system with Leah Davidson, which was an incredible and fascinating interview. And this one is no less incredible and fascinating. And it really goes hand in hand with last week's interview, because Lindsay's work is also all about the nervous system, and even more specifically, trauma and relationship trauma. And Lindsay is so amazing. I have followed her for a while. I love her podcast. I love the work that she does, the certification that she has for coaches. I've been in one of her other programs for a bit. I just love what she has to offer, and she's sharing a lot of that right here on the podcast today. So I'm really excited, and I know I've been talking for a little bit, so I want to get right into this interview. But first, I want to read her bio for you. So here is a little bit about Lindsay. She is a facilitator for trauma-informed coaches. Upon experiencing her own betrayal trauma 8 years ago, while simultaneously supporting her husband through his recovery from non-functioning anxiety and depression, betrayal trauma, and in his healing from childhood and sexual abuse, Lindsay Poelman became quite passionate about the resources she found to support herself. So passionate that she left her career in public and derivative accounting to become a life coach. After seeking additional training and working with women in trauma for over 5 years, she now trains coaches to do the same so that they too can provide a deep and safe healing possible for clients across the board who have experienced trauma. She currently runs an advanced relationship trauma certification program for coaches with a curriculum she put together with a trauma therapist. Lindsay has a vision of the whole world being trauma informed in order to better support personal healing, clients, abuse victims seeking support from families, clergy, and friends after being victimized. She also runs a trauma-informed coaching certification for people who aren't yet coaches but ready to make a career change. She currently lives in the south of France with her husband and 3 children. She loves the sea, the sun, French cuisine, being outside in nature, Mary Magdalene, traveling, and more. She sometimes says if she came back in another life, she'd be a tour guide because she loves exploring with people she loves. Okay, without further ado, let's get into this incredible interview with Lindsay Poelman. Lindsay, thank you so much for joining us on Wife Teacher Mommy, the podcast today.
Hi, how is well, I guess it's good to see or talk to everybody. I was going to say hello to everybody, but I won't get a response. So just sending love to everybody.
I know. It's always like the beginning of a podcast. You're just like, oh, wait, I'm like talking to everybody, but they're not here, but they're going to be. I love it. Okay, so Lindsay, can you tell us, before we dive into trauma and all the amazing things we're going to be talking about today, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do as a coach and just your whatever you'd like to share about yourself.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for having me here. So, my name is Lindsay Poelman, and I currently train coaches to become trauma informed. So, I have like a full trauma informed life coach certification that I offer. And then for people who are already coaches or already, doing some sort of coaching, I have an advanced trauma informed certification as well. And I got into that because gosh, I can't believe how fast time flies. A little over 8 years ago, my husband he had a very big mental breakdown. Like, he came and told me about a few things he'd been lying to me about. And it wasn't like malicious or anything. He was just like ashamed about some of his behavior. And, and he was working as a dentist, and I was a stay at home mom. And then within a week, he just became like completely non functioning. And we realized there was all this childhood trauma that came to a head. And so, about a year, maybe 2 years after getting him stabilized, he still wasn't working. And I was working as an accountant. I'd gone back to work. And I just remember getting to this point in my therapy and my recovery and with the work that I was doing in accounting, just remembering or thinking, all right, if I'm going to work for the next 30 years, like, I have to do something I love. Like, I love myself too much to lose myself in tax seasons and all these different
Mm-hmm.
projects that blow up here and there. And so I looked into coaching, and I found a program that I went through, and I started coaching women who had gone through betrayal trauma, because that's what I had experienced with my partner. And so um, basically, like, short version of that is I started coaching women experiencing that in their marriages with respect to porn. But then I started having a lot of people hire me who hadn't experienced betrayal trauma in that way, but they had experienced, real trauma in some other way. I had coaches coming to me
Mm-hmm.
out of other coaching programs, just lots of different things like that. And I just started seeing all the parallels and seeing really clearly, like, okay, this trauma thing, like, this trauma is everywhere. And
Mm-hmm.
I think so many people's behavior. And so I just feel this big call and push to really, really do everything I can to help get as many humans trauma informed and nervous system informed as well. So not just nervous system informed, but informed enough to take care of that and honor that, so that everybody can feel more at peace with their lives and be happier and live more of like a life led by their intuition and not kind of directed by their unconscious nervous system, their unhealed wounds and things like that. So yeah, that's kind of that vision kind of promulgated this curriculum that I co-created with a trauma therapist, and I've been doing that for a few years, and this is where I am.
I love that, Lindsay. I love that you kind of followed that intuition that you had. You're like, I feel like I can't do this, like, the tax season and everything forever. You're like, I want to do something like that feels really meaningful to me.
Yeah.
And the work that you're doing is so beautiful and amazing. Like, I've been following your work for a while, and I just love what you do and what you put into the world. So I'm really happy that you'll be sharing a small piece of that here with all of our listeners today. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. I'm happy to be here. So yeah, thanks.
So, first, let's kind of talk about what trauma means, because I feel like that can, when people hear the word trauma, it can feel like such a loaded word. And so, first, how would you define that?
Yes. Oh, there's so many definitions for trauma, but generally it's an emotional response to to some sort of event where um, typically where we don't have support after to like the support that we need after the event. So it's like a lasting emotional response that often results through living through a distressing event, or I would say, because you probably have a lot of women listening, a series of like chronic acute events as well. Okay. And then what can happen when we've experienced something like, had a circumstance where we have that emotional response and we don't have the support after to process or move through that, um, our body or our nervous system kind of starts, it like almost reorganizes, and starts basically supporting you in living life through the lens as if whatever that event was still occurring or could reoccur at any, could reoccur.
So yeah, it's like we have like our body feels like we have these experiences like still happening. When we talk about trauma, like I've heard you talk mention on your podcast like big T trauma and little T trauma
Mhm.
and the difference between the two, and some people might invalidate the little T trauma. I don't know. Can you define those two and kind of explain the difference and why we shouldn't be afraid to label something as trauma?
Yeah. So big T trauma is, I would say, is kind of like big T trauma is usually some sort of trauma that like society has deemed socially acceptable. Like it's unfortunately we so unconsciously hierarchize things, even trauma, and so generally when people think of big T, they're thinking of like war, sexual assault, rape, natural disasters, different things like that. And then little T is kind of more like the more acute, smaller um, events that occur that still cause trauma, but that people haven't put on this big T problem and or big T trauma in this space. And the problem with that is, especially as women, we tend to really discount or our
Mm-hmm.
diminish and invalidate our trauma that we've experienced when like we really can't compare people's pain, right? So our pain is
Yeah,
ours. And so to because we have this like kind of quote unquote hierarchy of big T, little t, it's really a lot of us unconsciously discount, diminish our very real trauma, very real pain, um, even though it's a very real thing, right? So like even like emotional abuse to me is like a very big thing, but I think in that big T, little t, it's usually put in the little t thing, even though it's such a mind f for so many people that go through that, right? And
oh
they're
yeah,
different parts of their lives. So
yeah, but people might like you were saying like put like, oh, but you weren't like physically abused or whatever, so it doesn't like it's not as bad or whatever. But like you said, it's we all experience pain, and we don't need to be like just because this person experienced it in a different way invalidate our own pain and the suffering.
yeah, exactly. And it's real. Yeah. So some other examples of little T trauma could be like bullying, non-life threatening injuries, which are still big things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Infidelity, betrayal, divorce, financial insecurity is a big one that a lot of people don't realize. Death of a pet. So all of those little things. And I think the big thing is just if it's helpful to use language to separate it into big and little, that's great. But if you're using it in a way to invalidate or diminish what you're experiencing, then maybe just stick with the word trauma.
For sure. So why do you think so many times we're afraid to label something as trauma? Like we might have an experience where we are like in the like trauma responses or stress responses like flight, fight, freeze, fawn, all of those. But we don't want to say that we're experiencing trauma. Why do you think it feels like such a dirty word? Almost.
I mean, I'm just like, is it a dirty word? I don't know. I mean, it's kind of like a taboo word.
Yeah,
What comes to my mind is like, I mean, we're normalizing it for sure. I don't think I think the world is a space where we're normalizing it more and more than ever, which is so needed and so necessary. I
agreed.
say that the reason people are weary there's a few reasons. One reason people could be weary of it is because, if you grew up in Western world or in America, like America is founded on puritanical values. And so, because of that, a lot of those puritanical values kind of come through into our thinking patterns and belief systems. And so oftentimes we have been so chronically conditioned to see how others have it worse than us or see at least this. Like we've been so conditioned to like not validate ourselves for whatever it is that we're experiencing that like allowing a label, like being willing to label an experience that you had or were on the receiving end of as traumatic kind of goes against where we've been conditioned. Another problem with that too is like again with some of these like belief systems and ideologies that do not serve us, especially, well, I don't want to say especially women, men too, of course. a lot of with these ideologies, people think, oh, well, if I say trauma, then I'm like victim mentality and I don't want to be victimy. But there's a difference between being victimy and being victimized by a person or a system or something like that. And the thing is, Kelsey, that I've seen with a lot of people is some people need to have the appropriate context to put to their lived experience so that they can label it and actually know what they're healing from. And so being willing to label and label what their lived experience was, to me, what I see is it can provide a direct and more deep line of healing to a specific event or to whatever it is that they're working through.
Oh, I love that how we're able to like define and look at our own experiences and, just acknowledge them. I feel like so often we're just like moving on to the next thing. We live in a very busy society where we're just like, next, 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 or I'm feeling these things, but I don't have time to feel this. I don't have time to deal with this. I need to grade those papers, or I need to take my daughter to her gymnastics class or whatever it is we're doing next. It's all go, go, go. And
Yeah.
I think that if we can just take that time to acknowledge our experiences and feel
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So many of us, again, have been like, it almost feels like indoctrinated to be like, to think that we can't hold nuance to see the damage that something has done and the good at the same time. And so often
Yeah.
trying to like share that something was damaging or painful, it's like, but look at the good. Like we just, it's, the people that when we share with people who don't know how to like hold space for us and our pain, it's like not only is it typically our natural space to be like, oh, but at least the good, or at least, when I think of like toxic parenting or something, it's like, but they still did so much for you. But it's like, what if that can be true and they're still
Yes.
function, right?
Yeah, I was actually talking about this a few episodes ago. We were talking about cognitive distortions and that all or nothing thinking, where it's like if my parents, like for example, if it were trauma from your parents, like you were just saying, like if they did anything good, then it's like, well, then it's all good. But it doesn't mean that. Like both things can be true.
Yeah.
It reminds me, I'm a huge Taylor Swift fan of her song Happiness. Do you know that one?
This one.
Where it's like happiness, like both of these things can be true.
You might need to sing it for all of us.
And there'll be happiness after you, but there was happiness because of you. Both of these things can be true. There is happiness. It's like, yeah, they can both be true. Right. And it's like a song about a relationship where she's saying there was good here, but there was also not good, and the relationship's ending. So I'm guessing that, like, but
Yeah.
she's still appreciating that there was good in it.
I think if we can do that with trauma, then when abuse victims come forward and try to share that, something, so and so was assaulted, or I mean, I'm hoping I'm not using too strong language, like assaulted by so and so, they can be received. Like if the family members are received or are trauma informed, if the family members know how to regulate their nervous systems, victims can come forward and be received by their families instead of like pushed away and isolated, right? And so, like it really matters when it comes to healing and humanity and victims being taken care of,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we want to make sure that that everybody's taken care of, and that's why we're talking about it here today, and so we can be aware of it for ourselves. And also, like, I do want to get into in this episode how we can be aware of it with like the kids that we teach, whether they're kids in our classroom or our own children, and just awareness of that and how it can help you be a better teacher in whatever capacity you are, so you can be, because like you said, you have this vision of everybody being trauma informed, not just like coaches, but like trauma informed teachers. How amazing would that be
Oh
if
my
every teacher were trauma informed, and every parent who parents children? Like, can you
God.
imagine a world
I'm
that would
I'm holding the vision for it, Kelsey.
Okay, so what types of, I think we've like kind of touched on this, but I want to explicitly talk about it. So what types of relationships can we have trauma in? So we've mentioned like marriages, we've mentioned parents, we've mentioned people, but it
Yeah.
doesn't always have to be people, right?
Yeah. Well, when people go through my certification programs, we typically have like, I let people choose a relationship to work on because typically, like with whatever your stickiest, toughest relationship, there's usually some trauma there. It doesn't have to be, but oftentimes there's either that or some deep wounding. And so I usually say it can be a person, a place, a thing, an event, institution, an organization. It can be money. Money is a really common one. Um, and again, it can be like a big organization, religious, or it could be like an organizational structure or a system.
Could be the education system, a district, a school. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Like you can, it just totally depends on, it depends on the system. It depends on you, because we are all
Mm-hmm.
so uniquely mapped. Like our brain mapping is also unique. That something that could be traumatic to you might not be to your coworker, right? You could both sit through the same thing or observe the same thing or be on the receiving end of the same thing, and you're both going to have different reactions to that. But that doesn't mean that it's objectively traumatic or not, just because it isn't
Mm-hmm.
or not. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's really important for us to be able to recognize that too, like of where we might be experiencing that and how it can really affect people in different ways, like you were saying, because we're all mapped differently. So like maybe like if we're looking at teachers, for example, one teacher, like she's having just a fine experience at this school and it's wonderful. And then for another teacher, maybe it's not. And that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with either of them. It's
Yeah.
just the fact that they're different people.
Yeah. Different people. Privilege can play into it too. Sometimes people are able to not have to experience certain ramifications or things because of different privilege, different varying
Hmm.
levels and intersection points. And so there's just so many different things. And I think something to recognize too is that like if you're, if you're working with someone and it's clear that, maybe they have gone through a lot or that whether they've experienced a lot of trauma or they're recovering or healing from a lot of trauma, there is a way to, again, we're speaking to so much nuance here, to be understanding and compassionate for those that, that we work around and work with while holding and maintaining really solid, strong boundaries too. So we can be compassionate, of course, but it doesn't mean we need to betray ourselves or our needs or anything like that because someone, was traumatized or something like that. So,
Yes, exactly. I love that. Okay, so kind of switching gears a little bit, I want to talk about so when people can identify that they maybe are feeling some of this trauma or their nervous system is activated, which I mean, I guess we haven't talked about a lot yet, but I mean, when they're feeling trauma, maybe we should talk about that for a second too. Or that can be part of this question too. But when we notice like that this is happening,
mhm.
or like we talked about the model a lot on the podcast, the self-coaching model that both of us went through the life coach school. So we know this, and I've talked about it on the podcast before. But what I definitely believe, and what I know you believe too, is that the self-coaching model, it is a tool and not the only tool to use to better ourselves. And there are appropriate times to use it. And then there are other times where something else might be better. So, how can our listeners identify when they want to use like thought work or when it is they need to do something else? Maybe they need to regulate their nervous system or ground themselves.
I think finding what your window of tolerance is can be really, really helpful so that like you can, your window of tolerance is like this space where, it's kind of like a baseline space where you generally feel calm, connected, emotionally regulated, able to self-soothe, able to think, able to reason and learn and have engaged conversations about the past, present, future. I think of the window of tolerance as like our zone of powerful decision making. And so what I would say is like if you have your an emotional intensity scale that ranges from like a 0 to a 10, 10 being like incredibly intense emotion, like terror, really like pretty high up there, and 0 meaning like zen, basically asleep. What I usually say is if you're like above a 7, maybe just like
Hmm.
do some grounding work or some, practice, do some exercises to help you regulate, down regulate, or up regulate back into your window of tolerance so that you can again use the self-coaching model to your advantage. I actually think of the self-coaching model in my programs. I don't even use it anymore, but like in my certification programs, but it doesn't mean it's not like it's a cool tool. I like to think of it
Hmm.
like a manifestation tool or manifestation
Mm-hmm.
tool, so that it's like we're taking care of our nervous system and getting into this place where we feel generally safe. And that's the time to like think about what we can channel, what we want to think about or feel or engage or embody to create the results that we want.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Like kind of like understanding that scale when you're like, okay, if I'm at a 7 or I'm above that, I need to ground myself before like doing any of this, like
Yeah.
even going into like thought work of any kind. Like that is not the time to be doing the and that's like a top down approach. Like we've talked about that before on the podcast. Like top down is when we're looking at our brain,
Yeah.
and then other times we want to go into our body and see what's going on there. So I love that.
Yeah, totally. So, and it can really help us just be, again, connected to our body, to our intuition, to our soul. And when we
Mhm.
have that, when that's generally there, that's when we want to like really use our manifestation powers and stuff like that, and make those really cool decisions from a grounded space. Not to say that we can't make powerful decisions when we're dysregulated, right? Or when we're like hyper aroused. Like if I am in fight or flight because I see a kid about to get run over by a bus, like I can still make a powerful decision to go get him out of the way, right? So
No, yeah.
so we don't want to get into this either or space, but I would say generally, if possible, that's what I like to aim for. But like if someone's in an abusive marriage or an abusive situation or something like that, that's not where we just figure out how to like. We don't always have the luxury to down regulate or up regulate ourselves into that window to make the powerful decisions. But that doesn't mean we can't also make powerful decisions when we're dysregulated as well.
Right. Like I was just writing in like I'm working on a book right now and I was writing about an example where like a principal walks in and they are having a surprise observation. You can't just be like, okay, sorry, class and principal, I'm going to do some meditation right now to regulate myself. There are moments where you can't just do that right then. So that's not to say that we have to always stop right in the moment. But when we are able to, like, let's say we get through the observation or like afterwards you save the kid from the bus or whatever, and you're very like, it doesn't all of a sudden you've saved the kid, suddenly those feelings are gone. That's not the case, right? Like, so what do we do when we are in a space where we can downregulate?
Oh, it totally depends on what that person experienced. Like there are like 300,000 ways to downregulate, and there are millions of like there are just tons of ways to upregulate.
Yeah.
But what I usually will say is like you can check in with your body and see what it needs to complete the stress response cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Like with the Hurricane Katrina victims, a lot of them were they were stranded during a flood, and it's like their fight flight, their nervous system or their sympathetic response was obviously like run, 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 like get away, get away, get away, but they could not
Mm-hmm.
get away because of the water. And then even when they were rescued, I think a lot of them were like kind of had to be strapped in or carried out. And so for the people who weren't able to get that flight response like out of their system, they did experience higher incidences of PTSD versus the people in the World Trade Center who were able to run away
Oh yeah.
or get
Yeah.
that out of their system, right? And so I think a lot of times when we um, and if there's an event where we can't do the thing that we wish we could do in the moment, like I might be driving on the freeway and something happens and I might have to keep driving to get to safety before blank, 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 right? Usually it's more of just like a check in, like, how can I complete this response? Do I need to shake my arms a little bit? Do I need to like dance it out? Do I need to just sit and like sway? Like it could be so many different things.
That's such a good point. Again, like we're also different, so we're going to need to regulate ourselves differently too. But such a good point, that whole story about the Katrina victims, where they obviously weren't able to run, versus the 9/11 victims, and just how even individual experiences that people have, like, it affect how we're able to complete that stress cycle. I've actually been reading the book Burnout by the Nagoski sisters, and oh, so good. I'm like, I love them. They're great.
Yeah.
But yeah, really good. Okay, so we have also kind of touched on this too, but like as we've been going, but we do have a mostly female audience listening to this podcast. When I surveyed last time, I mean, it was about a year ago, but I bet it hasn't changed. It was 97% self-identified in the survey as female. And I mean, I'm not surprised by that when you look at the podcast name. It's Wife, Teacher, Mommy, the podcast. But what do you think are some unique challenges with this that women face that are different?
Oh, it's such a good question. And you know what just popped up for me as you were saying that, like, as far as yeah, just as far as being conditioned as women or socialized as women. I don't know why this dropped in, but I'm just going to say it because I think there's there's a reason for it, and I'll explain it in a second. But my husband is a sexual abuse survivor. Like, he survived. That's what he refers to himself as, because of some childhood trauma there. And I remember, like, 3 or 4, maybe even 5 years after he had kind of like spoken up about it to, certain groups of people, I remember just saying, like, I'm really surprised by how many people believed you. And and that's all I said. And he said, yeah, he's like, I think it's because I'm a man. And I was just like, my heart was like, ooh, like, I think he's right. Like, oh, like, I hate it. It doesn't mean that he didn't get any pushback, but he's like, I think it's because I'm male. And so I would say for women, the things that I'm going to say, there's a reason for why we have a hard time believing that it's real for ourselves, because so many times, first of all, we inherit belief systems and things like that, and we can inherit, trauma can pass down through generations, like 7 generations. And so I think there's a history of women either who speak up and get silenced, or women who speak up and get isolated, women who speak up get killed. And so we don't want, it feels hard to believe, to allow ourselves to believe that something that happened to us is real. So I think that can play a big part in it. And so I think I see that as a struggle, just believing, like, this is real and it happened to me. But so often, the more you understand your body, the more even for my partner, whenever he would deny his trauma, his depression, anxiety symptoms would just, like, skyrocket. And then when he would tell his lived experience, like, things would kind of calm back down. And so letting yourself believe that your lived experience gets to be yours is a big thing. And if it feels hard to do, just know that that's totally normal. And I think just not discounting it once you see it, because we have a tendency as women to really self-gaslight. And sometimes we can, like, believe that it's real, but then when we're activated, we tend to question ourselves. But the narratives that we question ourselves with are generally the narratives that we internalized growing up that aren't necessarily true. So that's a big thing. And I would just say one other thing is, like, as women, being willing to invest in your healing and get support and learn how to receive help.
I think this is true. Women, and I mean, I've seen this in myself too, struggling to invest with my husband. Like, he might even be more supportive about me doing it than I am with myself doing it. And also, like, when I'm doing a webinar or something, I'll see so many people who, like, want to sign up for, like, our coaching program or whatever, but they're like, oh, I need to ask my husband about it. But then, like, a lot of the times they, like, oh, he'll just say no, so I'm not going to. It's hard to be like, I want to help everybody else around me. I can't invest this money in myself getting healing. So I've seen that too.
Before joining Wife, Teacher, Mommy Club, I was on my own with any challenges I faced. I didn't have anyone outside of my school that I could necessarily, like, talk to. That was all on me. I joined Wife, Teacher, Mommy Club because there are just so many resources available to club members, classroom resources, and the personal side with the coaching. That is a huge resource that I did not have prior to joining the club. And it's been really great getting an outside perspective on problems and issues that I might be facing. It really helps me to see them from another perspective. For me, Wife, Teacher, Mommy Club offers more than just the resources. It has that coaching component, and it has the Facebook group and the community component, and all of those things together help me in my job as a teacher. I'm not just trying one thing. I want all of the things, and wife, teacher, mommy gives that to me.
Something like that. And so I think being like when my husband first got sick, I was so willing to like throw all financial resources in his way. And I had a really like a trusted loved one who was like, what about you?
Yeah.
Like, do you want to go see a therapist? I was like, there's no way. I don't want to spend the money, kids, but like, how do I find babysitters? And, but really like once I started investing in my healing, whether it was through a therapist or through coaches or things like that, that's when things got a lot better for me. Like the trajectory got a lot better, a lot faster. So we're meant to be supported. We're a relational species. We are not meant to heal or do this or hustle alone or hustle to the top alone. We are meant to rely on each other. And so just recognizing in our biology, and just it's like not resist it, just allow for it when it comes to safe people offering help.
Yeah. And I was listening recently to, I'm in one of Bev Aaron's coaching programs. She's amazing. And she did a workshop that like relationships are not neutral. And we are actually like, we are biologically wired for connection. And so a lot of times that's where the trauma comes in. It's not just like, oh, they said these things and I can think what I want about it. Because if it's somebody who we're deeply wanting to connect with, then it doesn't serve us necessarily to call it neutral, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
So what can we do with this like knowledge about basically everything we talked about with trauma and the ways that we might not be helping ourselves get through that?
I would say like just go really easy on yourself in the beginning, because any awareness that you're gaining or gleaning from this podcast episode is already you're already creating and developing new neural pathways. And so if there's a way to just non-judgmentally and compassionately observe yourself, your behavior, your responses, I think that's a great place to start. And just be really gentle and question and see what's there, and kind of just see what your next steps are. Really, like it sounds really like that's it. I want like all the answers, but really just like being willing to notice an emotion can reduce the intensity of the emotion up to 40%. So you might be surprised at how much changes by just practicing the art of noticing and being more of a watcher of your experience with love and compassion. And then see what goes from there. So that's one way.
I love that. And it really is like, we don't have to feel, a lot of times we think like, oh, I see this problem, I need to fix it right now. I think especially as women, we want to be problem solvers. We want to make sure that, we take care of the thing. And I think that a lot of times it's just one step at a time. And sometimes that might feel painful. It's like, oh, but I want to make this progress like now. I know I need to do it. But it's like, oh, whatever trauma or experience we have, it's taken time to get to where we are. So of course it's going to take time it's just like when we have a baby, and it's not like, all of a sudden like we are, and not that we ever need to get back to where we were. Like, I mean, it's different. Like, and it's the same with healing. We're going to get to an even better place.
Yeah. Like the nervous system doesn't like to be rushed. And so if you are trying to like find a shortcut to healing, your nervous system is going to pick up on that pressure, and it's going to resist like the very thing that like you're trying to offer it. And so just really lovingly letting it take, and to me, I'm a fan of having professional support and peer support. And while also like letting your body do its thing on its own timeline, because it really, and when I say your body, I'm speaking more to your body and in your body's intelligence and knowing and when it's time to heal certain things versus like, wounds and things like that don't want anything to change and don't want you to like just want to maintain homeostasis because it's familiar, not necessarily because it's comfortable. And so I am a believer that our body knows when to look at or process something. And so I like to take a forward-facing approach to that, to my healing and growth, and just being proactive about the life that I want and what I want to create, and trusting that whatever's meant to come up will. And it does. and I work through it, and I have support. And I work through my, traumas and past wounds so differently now because I know what they are. I know how to hone in on them. I know how to love on them. I know how to process them. I know when it makes sense to bring in other people to support me with the releasing. So yeah, it doesn't mean my life is like trauma free now, but it's so different than how I used to handle things, 10 years ago with resistance and ignoring and pushing through and thinking I
Yeah.
could exercise my way away from anything, well, and so yeah, it's different, but I just feel so much more connected to myself now than I
Yeah.
did back then.
Yeah. I think it's just trusting in that timing and understanding that your intuition is going to guide you in the direction you need to go, and that the journey is part of it. It's not like there's not a destination we need to get to. It's all about who we are becoming all along the way, and just the like little 1% improvements are adding up, and the neural pathways just from like listening to this podcast, or subscribing to Lindsay's podcast, or continuing to listen to this podcast, are going to help you like little bit by little bit to help you figure out what you need, because you can do it, my friend, listening right now. We've talked a lot about healing ourselves, which is usually what I talk about more here, actually, because I feel like, again, we tend to focus a lot on, our kids or our students or our husbands or partners or whatever. But I do still want to touch on how being trauma informed as a teacher or as a parent can help us, like just knowing about trauma can help us be a better teacher, like we kind of talked about earlier in the podcast. And I know you've said this before, and it just really is like, oh yeah, if you work with people, you work with trauma. It's like, there's no like, okay, oh, I have a class full of 30 students. There's no trauma here, there's going to be. So what do you think is important for us to know as we're working with kids?
Oh, it's such a good question. With kids, a lot of times, I think the big thing is like making sure you don't establish identities for them based on their behavior. Like a lot of their behavioral quick responses are pretty instinctual based on whatever something they've experienced, right? Of course, these kids have prefrontal cortexes and things like that, but I just feel like having so much compassion, like compassion for behavior, and also setting boundaries. And sometimes it's easier to just set boundaries specific to the event versus like taking everything personally that kids do and things like that. So just sticking to circumstance and boundary versus like letting it mean some big thing about who the kid is and how good or bad they are and blah, blah, blah. And also letting it not mean anything about you. Because
Mm-hmm.
like they go through a lot of stuff and they are, yes, they're resilient, but they're also very impressionable. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, in my eyes, it's like, how can we just love them while maintaining boundaries, really, and make sure they know that they're good?
Yeah. I love that. Just showing them love and understanding and compassion. And yeah, and we do need to have boundaries sometimes as well. That's really important to know how and when to hold those so we can take care of ourselves, so we can be there for them. That's, I
Yeah.
mean, yeah.
Yeah. And if there's a kid that's like particularly triggering, depending, if a lot of the people listening like have classrooms, like it might be a window or a green screen into where there's some work for you, right? Like maybe there is some sort of boundary or circumstance that needs to be a boundary set or circumstance change. But a lot of times our relationships are like green screens into where some of our work is to do. So not all the
Yeah.
time, but I would say a lot of times. But I don't want to
Yeah.
say that in a way that you guys go self gaslight yourselves. It's
Oh,
more
for sure.
I check in with yourself there.
Yeah, it's what Gabby Bernstein would call like a universal lesson. It's like, okay, this is a lesson coming to me so I can learn and get better from this, and have all that self-compassion and grace and non-judgment all along the way.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay, well, this was so good, Lindsay. I feel like we've covered a lot of ground here on this podcast. Thank you for sharing so much with us. Is there anything else you would like to share before we kind of close off the interview portion?
No, I mean, I love being here. Thank you for having me. For anyone who wants to come, you can come find me and say hello on Instagram. I'm Lindsay Poelman Coaching, and it's Poelman. And my website's the same, lindsaypoelmancoaching.com. So, yep.
Awesome. Okay. And do you have any like freebie opt-ins or anything or like free resources or anything you'd like to share?
Sure. I have a few right now that I'm doing. I have like a mini course called Feminism 101 for Christians, which is a great one to just learn about like systems of patriarchy, feminism, intersectionality, privilege, and oppression, and stuff like that. And then I also have one I just put out. It's called A Gardener's Guide to Thinking.
I love that because I feel like so many of us women, we have focused so much on everyone else that taking some time to get to know ourselves with something guided like that could be very helpful. So thank you for providing those. Okay, we will get those links in the show notes so you can grab those and you can, go to Lindsay's website and Instagram. Thank you so much, Lindsay, for being here today. It was so much fun doing this interview with you.
Yes, thank you too. Take care.
Thank you for listening to Wife Teacher Mommy, the podcast. If you enjoyed our time together, be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you're ready to take the next step, I'd love for you to join me face-to-face of my next free virtual mindset masterclass. In this masterclass, I'll share my full story of how it transformed my teacher overwhelm and anxiety into balance, authenticity, and a true understanding of myself. And the best news, it'll work for you too. I'll break down my 5-step framework, share inspiring stories that will help shift your mindset, and you'll even get to see life coaching in action. You'll get a free resource and a special opportunity just for joining us, and you won't be able to get this anywhere else. Did I mention this masterclass is free? You've got nothing to lose. All you need to do is sign up, add it to your calendar, and commit to showing up live. Go to wifeteachmommy.com/masterclass to sign up or head to the link in the show notes. I will see you at the masterclass.